Do you dream of having large furry friends on your farm? Do you have big tasks like building a fence holding you back? We've completed many tasks on our homestead recently, and it's all because we try to make things as easy as possible. When I talk about a fence, do you immediately picture a 4-strand barbed wire fence? Picturing that type of fence may be why you are struggling to get this item off of your to-do list. Driving all of those posts and stringing up all of that wire feels like a huge task, and it is, not to mention how much money it will cost. We decided to wait on building that type of fence and to instead build an electric fence so that we could go ahead and have our cows and Mustangs on our farm now. You have probably seen an electric fence before, but did you know all of the benefits of it? Well, stick around to learn more about the pros and cons of having an electric fence compared to a wire fence and tips for building one that works, like this one.
First, let's talk about effectiveness. Most important thing to consider is whether or not it will actually work for you. Will it keep your animals in? Well, that depends on your animals and the fence that you build. Is your shock powerful enough for the size of your pen? Do you remember to keep it turned on? Is it put up correctly? Are your animals just punks? These are all things to consider. We have a calf who gets out sometimes and he just mows our yard, so we are fine with it because we have plenty of space, and he never goes very far because his mama does not get out with him. He only would get out because when he was a calf, I did a terrible job remembering to turn on the fence, and so he tests it sometimes. He is doing that better now, but only because I am also doing better keeping it turned on. Second, let's think about time. One of the biggest benefits of building an electric fence is you can get it done in a short amount of time. We built a 1/4 mile fence for our cows the same day that we made the 4-hour round trip to my father's farm to bring them up here. And that was in the middle of January, so we did not have much daylight. We worked on the fence probably from 5 p.m. to 8 or 9 p.m.
This is what starting a farm kind of looks like.
It's dark.
10:30. And we got our first moose.
I was 7 months pregnant, so if I could do it that night, you definitely can. We moved the horses just a few weeks ago, and we did work on their fence, which was a 1/4 mile also for 2 days, but only because we only worked on it a couple hours each day, and I had Miriam when I worked on it, which always makes tasks go slower. Miriam is my baby, by the way. The amount of time to build an electric fence compared to a wire fence is a difference of a few days, especially if you're like us and do not have an electronic post driver. Driving your post is definitely going to slow you down with building a wire fence because you need a lot more posts than you do with an electric fence. So electric fence will be a lot faster. Now let's talk about cost. I'm going to go through the cost of building materials for 1 mile of electric fence compared with 1 mile of barbed wire fence in the same location. We're not actually planning on using barbed wire fence, but that's the most common fence you see. And so I will be doing that for the comparison. And we're going to talk about 4 strands of barbed wire fence. You sometimes see 3 or even 5 strands, but 4 is kind of the average and the most common. Likely you aren't actually going to use 1 mile of electric fence. 1 mile of fencing covers up to 40 acres depending on the shape. If it's in a square, it's going to have the most land inside of it, and that's going to be up to 40 acres. You probably don't need 1 mile of fencing, but I just used 1 mile for simplicity and calculations. I'm using the cost given by Tractor Supply, and I actually hadn't done this calculation before we did this video. I knew the electric fence should be cheaper, but I didn't know how much. Let's look at this. And costs have been rounded. A 5-mile electric fence charger, which is about the smallest distance. I didn't see a 1 mile fence charger. A 5-mile electric fence charger is about $180. And I'm doing the price for this solar one. This is the one we have. I highly recommend a solar powered fence charger. It's a lot less maintenance than a battery powered charger. The wire is about $35 for 656 feet. It takes 8 of those rolls to cover a mile because there are 5,280 feet in a mile. And if you divide that by 656, you get 8. If you make a double-stranded electric fence, which I do recommend that you do, you're going to need 16 total rolls. The cost of your wire is about $560. For us, we put one post every 40 feet. You can tell our wire is really tight. That's all you need. If you do one post every 40 feet, you're going to need about 132 posts, because 5,280 divided by 40 is 132. At about $3 per post, you're looking at $396. You also need a couple gate handles, which will cost $8. I recommend having metal T-posts for any corner. If you need four corners at $5.80 a piece, that will cost you $23.20. Insulators for those T-posts will cost about $7. A grounding rod is $30. Copper wire for grounding is $11. Therefore, adding all of those numbers together, you would get about $1,214 to build a 1-mile electric fence. Now let's look at the cost of building a 4-stranded barbed wire fence. For the wire, you can get 1,320 feet, which is a 1/4 mile, for basically $140. You'll need 4 of those to go a mile. And if you're going to do 4 strands, that means you're going to need that 4 times. So 4 times 4 is 16. That means that the total 140 times 16 is 2,240. Already you're spending $2,240 on your barbed wire fence. You already can see it costs more, but let's go ahead and finish the calculations. The next thing is posts. They recommend that you put posts 8 to 12 feet. 10 is the average of 8 and 12, and it's an easy number to use to calculate, and it's probably what we're going to do when we build our permanent wire fence, so that's the number I am going to use. Every 10 feet for a mile, that means you're going to need 528 posts. At $5.80 per post, that total will be $3,062.40. You're going to need 4 T-post clips per post. Those are the low wire metal clips that keep the wire to the post. If you need 4 per post, 4 times 528 is 2,112. You could get a bag of 50 clips for $9. You'll need 43 bags, because 5,112 divided by 50 is 43, or actually it's 42 and quarter, but you'd have to round up because you would still need some more clips. That means you're going to spend $387 on clips. If you add in a gate, that's going to be another $120. Not counting other little supplies you might need, that is already a total of $5,809.40. You can see it costs about 4 times as much to build a barbed wire fence than it does an electric fence. That's a pretty big chunk of change. Next, moving on to flexibility. Another positive about an electric fence is you can change where it is located if you want to. A barbed wire fence, once you put it up, you are not going to be taking it down. There is an advantage of starting out with an electric fence, because you can later decide where you want your final fence row based on trial and error. For us, we have electric fence behind our house, and we decided we wanted that closer to our house because we didn't want to have so much yard space. And if we didn't have an electric fence, we wouldn't be able to make that change. Lastly, let's talk about longevity. That's our 5th point. The electric fence wire, it's a plastic. It's not going to last as long as metal. It can go bad in the sun. The plastic posts especially can go bad, but you're only going to probably notice that if you try to move them. If you don't move them, they can last a long time. A metal wire fence can go bad, especially because it can get pushed against by the animals. However, with some maintenance, they can last a lifetime. A positive about electric fence is animals do avoid contact with it, so they're not going to give you that same wear and tear by pushing up against it. Ultimately, you can expect a wire fence to last longer, but an electric fence can last a really long time if it is properly cared for, especially if you get the metal posts. Maybe I've convinced you to get an electric fence. Now let's get into some tips for building an effective one. First, make it straight and use T-posts for corners. If you don't do this, it's almost impossible to make it tight because it will be pulling against the plastic posts, which lean over. Sometimes it's fine to not make a tight, straight fence. It depends on the shape of your pasture and how long you want to leave the fence up. One I showed you just a second ago was my in-laws fence, and don't worry, Katie, I am not saying you didn't do a good job. Your fence is perfect for what you need it for, which is a small pasture space that's really round, and you only occasionally put horses in it, and those horses already respect the electric fence. Those are all reasons why you don't have to have it straight and tight. For us, we have a really large space and we wanted our fence to be semi-permanent, so we wanted to make it straight. It looks really good, stays tight, and lasts a long time. Now, when we got the cows back in January, Danny and I actually had a disagreement about this very topic, and it's surprisingly enough, I was on the side of just sticking posts in the ground and getting it done. Who cares if it's straight? That was how we always did it growing up. And that night it was late and I was waddling around pregnant. I did not want to take the extra time to make a really good straight fence. I don't remember how Dannon ended up winning that battle in those conditions, but he did, and boy, am I glad he did now. Our fence looks good and it isn't slowly getting looser and it's not leaning, all things that would have happened if we hadn't used his method. Another tip I have is to use a hammer when putting in your fence posts, especially if the ground is hard. Electric fence posts are made to just push in with your foot, but this does not always work. It's easier just to bring a hammer and drive them in. I recommend hammering from the top, not from where you push your foot, because if you hammer it in at the bottom where you push your foot, it can sometimes break, as I know from breaking quite a few. Last suggestion I have that you might not have thought about is always make a gate. Make it so that the fence stays tight when you open the gate. So tie off your wire and then use another strand for the gate. The gate should be big enough that you can drive through. If you don't tie off the strand and you try to open the gate, your entire fence will sag, which means your cows way back in the pasture might get out. A gate is better than driving over the fence. Definitely a tip I would follow. Do you have any tips or questions? Follow along for more homesteading information.